literature and science are just two of the ways in which we build our sense of the world. Literature is like an older, crazy sister of science, because it's disorganized. It is not tied down to any set idea of the truth, so it can consider anything. And in that sense, it has a freedom that science can't aspire to. Literature can look at... I think of literature as being a science that doesn't really care about experiment. It doesn't have to be... You can consider the wildest ideas, and you can play with theories that are wrong, that are delirious, that are insane. Science has to necessarily prune back like the branches of the tree of thought, and see which ones correspond to objective reality. Literature is nothing like that, and science's great source of power is that it has a very strict relationship to reality. And from that we have achieved wonders, while literature has no power, no importance at all. And because of that, it is very precious, because we can think about anything. We can play with ideas that contradict self-evident meanings in the world. And that is a great source of beauty, of inspiration. It's a great source of fun too. You can really think about anything as a writer, and you don't get that freedom if you're a philosopher or if you're a scientist. We can be haphazard and wrong, and we can be playful in ways that you can't get away with if you're doing science, or if you're doing philosophy, or if you're trying to be serious or important, or to change the world, or be successful. So it's like a habit of shadows. We're like cockroaches, as soon as someone turns on the light. But there's so much to be found underneath things, I think that's where we feel most comfortable. I think when you use a phrase like objective reality does exist, you're taking so much for granted. It's such a loaded... Reality is a loaded term, and it's something best left to others. Literature deals with imagination. And imagination, derangement, delirium, that's where our strengths lie. We shouldn't worry too much about reality as writers. And I think when literature has gotten bogged down in that, when we play the real game, we're just reflecting back an image of the world that we already know, that we already possess, and we inhabit. So we end up writing sort of the literary equivalent of a sitcom, something that just feels like an impoverished view of reality. But when you not necessarily give up on realism, but when you let in other perspectives, I think we're actually mirroring lived experience in a better way, because it's so loaded, right? You're never just looking at a flower. You're looking at a flower and you have an emotional tone, and you're contaminated by your other senses. Memory is biting at you. It's very hard to give any measure of what it feels like to be alive from moment to moment. It's not realist. I think that our experience of the world is not realist at all. It's hallucinatory. That's kind of what literature should mirror. Beauty is a criterion in itself. I don't think you can give too much importance to it, because I think it's the most important thing there is. I think that truth is completely secondary. And in that sense, this whole beauty, truth, and I forgot the other one from the Greeks. Just give me beauty, and I think that's enough. It's not just a human thing. No, it is something in which the entire world is caught up. I think life and beauty are just so completely intertwined. We don't realize it. We don't understand that it is something that was here before us. No, we're just kind of interacting with some of its versions. And it's not just in the flowers, right? It's also beneath the ground. It's in the dirt. It's kind of everywhere. I think it's the universe being in love with itself. And it's great to be a part of that. The universe has its sense of beauty that is it exceeds us, it far exceeds us. There's this wonderful part of a comic book by Alan Moore where there's a man he's sitting on Mars, and he's just looking at the scale of the mountains, the depths of the gorges, and there's not a single life form on the planet, and there's still beauty. There's beauty in empty space. There's beauty in nothingness. I think that I think we're aware of that all the time because we live we live in impoverished spaces. We inhabit impoverished spaces when we're sitting inside our living rooms. There is a certain complexity to the natural environments that we developed in as a species that is missing. And it's something that is very hard to mimic. And that I think that in our modern world we're trying to create something that has at least some part of the beauty that we can find in the natural world. And that's why things are getting more and more complex and loaded. I think we're just trying to copy what surrounds us. I think epiphanies are one of the mechanisms by which the front and the back part of our brains communicate and work together. It's such a common experience to feel that you're in control of your brain, of your thought processes, that you're kind of driving the car, and you're not at all. And epiphanies are like the sudden invasion of that. No, this dark knowledge which kind of jumps into the world through an epiphany is something that to me is quite wondrous. You can't explain it away. If you ask the person who suffered an epiphany, they don't really have good answers for it. You have to rely on mechanisms that are older, right, and that we've kind of lost. But to me, epiphanies are these sudden jumps in awareness, in our knowledge of the world and ourselves that is just fascinating. It's something that I've always lived for, personally, to the point where it becomes like a bit of a joke, because how many epiphanies can you have? You can have a ton of them. You can have a lot. But the first ones you don't forget. You're taken over by something. It's really, and if they're big enough and if they come at the right circumstances and at the right point of your life, it can really change the direction that you're going. So I think that's also one of the reasons why so many people avoid them. No, because the lives that we have are so, we've built them through decades of mistakes and, trial and error. And for someone to reach down or to reach from below and tug at you really hard, it's off-putting. It's very hard to deal with. But there is a certain type of knowledge that I think you can only have access to by way of an epiphany. And it doesn't play a big role in science, but it does play a big role in writing. I'm sure of it. The epiphanies that happen in my book, they're literary epiphanies. That's not how science works, especially not anymore. There's really not that much space left for epiphanies, right? Science is different. It's a hive mind. It's like a ant's nest, no? Uh, the working parts are kind of dumb, but they're doing something incredible between all of them, right? I think that's probably how science works. But I'm not interested in that because I'm fascinated by singularities. I'm fascinated by things that kind of lie outside the regular order. Exceptions of all kinds. One of the things that I that I get angry about is this. There's like a modern depreciation of the word genius, like as if there were no, as if everybody was the same, and it's not like that. It's not like that at all. One of the great things about being human is how different we are, and there are these outliers. No, there's men and women that really seem to come from another world, and they suffer for it too, right? That's why in my book, it's not just the epiphanic moment of triumph, it's also the fall and the consequences. Because it is very dangerous to suddenly discover something new about the world. It's very dangerous to suddenly discover something new about ourselves. It is going a step beyond, and you fall into this sort of really strange space, right? It's like colonizing new territory, and it's dangerous. But to me, I think that's fascinating. I think that were it not for these strange, unique beings, I don't know if we would have gotten very far. We still need exceptionality. I have lots of favorite geniuses. The one I'm obsessed with right now is a Hungarian mathematician. He's called John von Neumann. Von Neumann was like... He was described by his friend Eugene Wigner, who was a Nobel laureate. I became obsessed with von Neumann because of this phrase by Eugene Wigner, who said, you know, like Paul Dirac was like my brother-in-law, and I was friends with Einstein, and I like had time with Enrico Fermi and all these people who were unbelievable. But he said of John von Neumann, only he was truly awake. And I thought, what kind of enlightenment is this, right? Because it's not the type of enlightenment that we tend to think of, you know, a very, I don't know, spiritual guru, Buddha type figure. This was a alcoholic, womanizing mathematician. He really was like a small, childish god playing around with the world. And his influence, we're still feeling it. We don't know, but it's there. It's like he built this world for us. And he was exceptional in every way, and he was also pretty pathetic and childish and irresponsible. They're not conscious geniuses. They are otherworldly. They are driven by something that they don't understand. And I think, to me, that is really why geniuses are so fascinating, because the things that they do come from their unconscious. And, well, we all have an unconscious, right? So I still have the belief that perhaps one day, you know, I'll have a better conversation with my own head. When we cease to understand the world is not about the dark side of science at all. It's just that when you write, I think that literature is one of the dark arts, really. So it's not just, you're not just shining a light and showing things that are new or spectacular. You're also kind of putting a veil on things. For things to be magical again, you have to shroud them. You have to kind of, how do you show what is most important, which is nothingness, you know, and the void. You have to put something on top of it. You have to shroud it. And that's what you do with words. That's what you do with writing. When We Cease to Understand the World is a book that is trying to talk about abysmal matters. You know, the black hole singularity, the uncertainty principle, the horrors of war, the horrors of art. And you do that by obfuscating. I'm trying to show that there are things that are profoundly mysterious and still misunderstood 100 years after they were discovered. There is such a thing as the wave function in quantum mechanics, where there is not a living soul, no, alive or dead, who really comprehends what it seems to be saying about the world. And we have to be reminded of that. I think that we have to be reminded that we live in a world that is bigger than us. And it can be terrifying, but it's also awe-inspiring. And we cannot survive without mysteries, no? If we explain away everything, if we think that we have a proper understanding of ourselves and the world, we're going to miss out on what's most important. Because mysteries are more important than truths. The wonderful thing about the uncertainty principle is the road that leads up to it. No? We were trying to understand reality at a level that was completely beyond us. We didn't have the right language for it. I don't think we have the right mind for it. No? Our minds have developed at a certain scale. And yet, through mathematics, we can peer into things as much in the way that we use telescopes and microscopes do. It is a tool that grants us access to realms of experience that we don't have like the proper brain for. So we suddenly got a glimpse into that world. In 6 months, not only one equation to understand this realm, but two. And they were completely opposed. And it was a fundamental contradiction, and they were created by two men whose character were fundamentally different. So we're kind of walking towards a deeper understanding and a truth that was, up to that moment, 1927, I believe, or 1924, it was completely beyond us, and suddenly it's there in front of us. You know, we're seeing, like Werner Heisenberg said, we're seeing into a beauty that nobody thought existed before. And immediately we come up to a limit, no? Which is the uncertainty principle is one of those iconic limits to human understanding. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of it, but what's fundamental to me is that it points to a truth that to me is becoming more evident all the time, that a deep search for truth will lead you to uncertainty. It's like uncertainty is the highest form of wisdom that we can aspire to. It is not security, it is not power, it is a humbling experience. That's why it's at the heart of when we cease to understand the world, because I think that writing should be, at the same time, it should give you access to the world, and it should also darken it for you, so that it becomes mysterious again.